Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A Idle Podcast, the podcast where I do weekly book reviews. This week, I read The Woman in the Window by A.J. Finn. Released in 2018, this book details the dark life of Anna Fox, an agoraphobic who observes the world from the safety of her home. The audience is tasked with determining the sanity of Anna and thus the authenticity of a crime that may or may not have happened. Now we're finally back to the fiction pieces. This is mystery fiction. It's set, for the main part, in the Fox residence, which is in New York City. And the timeline is fairly short, stretching from October 24th through November 15th. And at the end, there is a jump 6 weeks forward. So everything is happening basically within a few days of each other. And there's also a film adaptation that was released in 2021, and I am going to touch on that at the end of the review. So this book is told through first-person narration via Anna. Now, there's a few problems with that because off the bat, we are all aware that she is an unreliable narrator. And there are a few reasons for this. First, there is the natural bias of first-person narration, which just ultimately means one person isn't able to be omnipresent. They don't know everything that is happening outside of their vision, outside of, the conversations that they're holding. Therefore, you don't have all the facts, so you can rely on your experience, but that doesn't mean that that is truly how things are playing out. Now, Anna suffers with a few mental illnesses: depression, anxiety, panic disorder, and agoraphobia, most importantly. And if that wasn't enough, she has a healthy dose of wine all the time. So even in healthy doses, it's too much. So I am going to classify her as an alcoholic. And she's also heavily medicated throughout the book. And even though they are prescribed to her, mixing that substance, the many different medications that she has with alcohol, it's not, you really can't trust what she's saying, because honestly, she doesn't really know what she's saying sometimes. So now with first person narration, there is of course internal monologue. And with Anna, this really comes down to recounting every detail and every event that she observes from her window. Because she suffers from agoraphobia, she does not leave the house. So, to pass the time, she is essentially stalking her neighbors. And in the midst of her giving all of this information that honestly doesn't really matter, like what people are reading in their book club or who's leaving the house at what time, we do get background information and past events explained to us, but it interrupts her telling, what's going on in the present. So her thoughts seem very choppy, and given everything that I just said, it makes a lot of sense, but it's hard to follow her line of thinking nonetheless. Now, the background information is told sometimes through flashbacks, and this provides a prolonged answer to the question that we all have, which is, why is she like this? What led to this situation that we see in the beginning of the book? I will say, though, that at some points it's difficult to maintain the timeline, even though it's very short. And that is because the flashbacks are not marked by the date that it's being, the flashbacks are not marked by, their respective dates. It's only really tracked by the day that she is remembering these events taking place. And that is because A.J. Finn marks the chapters and the different chunks, because sometimes a day takes place over several chapters, with the day of the week and the date. And this is helpful because it does preserve the timeline for the audience. But I think that, because, the days are marked, So it would just make sense for me if there was a date, when she's talking about the flashback. But honestly, all of that kind of adds to the blurriness of her vision. She really can't get her bearings on the situation, and neither can the audience. So the timeline that is preserved definitely helps with keeping some type of order. Now, the book is 100 chapters, and much like Anna's thinking and her thinking patterns, they're short and kind of choppy, and they're very descriptive. Sometimes, especially in the beginning of the book, it's tedious because, again, a lot of what she's describing is stuff that doesn't really matter. Details about other neighbors that we never hear about again, past the first 2 chapters. So once you get through that, though, to the thick of it and the main characters, then you're good to go. And the book is 427 pages long. So when we're talking about characters, obviously the first person we need to discuss is Anna Fox, who again is an agoraphobic. And this was induced by PTSD in response to a major trauma. Now, agoraphobia is defined as a heightened fear of public places or open spaces, which renders some people homebound, and this includes Anna Fox. Her only stimulation comes from strangers and neighbors and what they're doing in their day-to-day. And she has binoculars and she has a camera, so she can look into their living rooms and their rooms and what they're doing, who they're sleeping with, everything. So she knows all of the hot gossip. And it's honestly unsettling. It's an unsettling fascination with the outside life. And the irony, of course, is that she's forced from her mental illness to stay inside. Now, her profession, she is a psychologist. She's a child psychologist. And this contributes to the plot because she's able to conduct an analysis of most situations around her and people. She's just trained to do that. And in the text, she actually says of psychologists that they are interpreters, they're translators, and that's exactly what she does in a lot of the crucial situations in this book. She's taking in her surroundings and she's doing her best to interpret it, not because she's a bad psychologist, but again, she's dealing with a lot of issues and she's also impaired from various substances. In my opinion, this proves her rationality. So she's not crazy, she's just sick, she's suffering from something, but she is able to think with a rational, analysis of the situation. She's able to put 2 and 2 together when she's not super drunk or super medicated. So the next character I want to touch on is Ed, who is Anna's husband. Right away, we can see that they are very civil in communication, although clearly they don't live together. And really what happens is Ed serves as a rock for Anna's sanity. When she's having conversations with him, they are, I don't want to keep saying rational, but they're normal conversations, and she doesn't seem like she's really suffering that much. And she acknowledges when she goes too far. And so Ed is essentially the normalcy here in this situation. Now, Granny Lizzie, that's the screen name of one of her friends on an agoraphobia chat room. I think it's called Agora. The reason I want to talk about her is because her questions actually introduce us to the catalyst of Anna's lifestyle. And so without Granny Lizzie's questions about, I don't think she actually said what led you to this, but they were building a rapport. And from then, that's when Anna opened up, and that's when we find out more of what happened and why she is the way that she is. Now, Ethan is one of the neighbors, and I would classify him as a middle character. it's like the plot is happening around him, and each character is worried about the effects of, these terrible situations on him. So he kind of slides through the book. And it's interesting because, again, this is a mystery thriller. And so there were several culprits that I suspected. And he's one of the very few characters that never arouses suspicion. And what I would account that to is he's young. He's a lot younger than every other character. And he's also perceived as weak and fragile, whether that be emotionally or physically. So he's one of those characters that he's important enough to be on this list, but he's also kind of just, hanging out in the background, and things are just happening, and Ethan happens to be there. So now next, I have to mention this character, Punch. Punch the cat. This is Anna Fox's cat, the only other living being really that she interacts with on a daily basis. Honestly, cats are legends, so had to put them on the list. And I will say though, the cat always knows. Animal lovers know this already, but your animals, your pets, they already know. They can pick up on vibes and energies. And the reason I'm mentioning him, or was it a girl? I don't know. I know the cat's name was Punch, but a specific interaction with Punch serves as a crucial plot point. So just keep that in mind if you haven't read the book yet. And lastly, I want to talk about wine. So I was originally going to make this a theme, but much like Punch the cat, wine is always around Anna. Always in her hand. She's always drinking it or spilling it. She says she buys it by the case. It contributes to the delusion, like I said before, in the blurred vision of the audience and Anna, because we can't gather things clearly because she can't see or think clearly because she's drunk. Now, wine receives more page time than every other character except for Anna. And I would say this kind of fills the void of people and of not having her family within arm's reach, because anytime she's feeling a strong emotion, happy, sad, whatever, she pours herself a glass of wine. And so that is her comfort in addition to her conversations with Ed. All right, so the first theme here, of course, it's trauma. In terms of events, the Russell family reflects an aura of domestic disputes. But also the Fox family has this event of dissolution, this separation that is never really explained clearly by Anna. In the plot, anyone who has trauma lingering around them, that ultimately engages the suspicion of each character and their motives. Because if you're perceived as someone who is either plotting revenge or you have something to prove, then you are now thrown into the suspect pot. And again, Anna is trained in the effects of trauma through her profession. And so it's the sad irony of someone who knows how mental illnesses work, and now she's dealing with it. Now she's dealing with a super traumatic event, and she understands logically everything that's happening, but she's still suffering. Now next, mental illness. Again, agoraphobia is a very, the most prevalent mental illness in this book. It results in her recluse lifestyle, so it's the reason she is inside. Now, the interesting points come from the reaction to Anna's mental illness. So by her neighbors, she's almost written off and gossiped about, but ultimately forgotten. In a way, this enables Anna's lifestyle. It's alluded that prior to this traumatic event happening, Anna did have neighbors that she was friendly with, that she cared about, they cared about her, but the neighbors kind of just pushing her to the side, and it's like, yeah, we don't really talk to her. That ultimately enables it because they do have a small responsibility to try to help her, but just ignoring her is contributing to the problem. Of course, Anna ultimately has the responsibility and her therapist and all the doctors she's working with to try to make herself better. But I didn't like how it seemed like she didn't have any support, whereas before that she clearly had friends, and so it was just kind of sad to see. And that places us in the beginning of the plot where Anna is stagnant and she's stuck in her way of staying in the house and just not interacting with anyone. She does have a few encounters with the police, and they kind of receive her as, well, she can't need help because she's crazy and she's projecting her trauma onto other people. And so by labeling her as a nuisance, they're saying that she should not be afforded the benefit of the doubt. This results in the delayed resolution in the third act. And lastly, her encounter with Jane, who is the only person that really treated her like a human, just by being empathetic and friendly and kind, and acknowledging that, she has agoraphobia and she stays inside, but not really letting that, come in between their interactions. And what happens is they build such a firm foundation on friendship in just a few visits that this fuels Anna's immense concern for Jane, which is what drives the plot for the rest of the book. So that interaction, or those couple of interactions that they had, is what, kind of stuck with Anna. And that's why we have this book, because she was pushing so hard because she was so worried about the one person that showed care for her. And lastly, isolation. Again, this is, I keep repeating it, but agoraphobia is a very large part of this book. This is why Anna is restricted to her house, and she's restricted in her mind. She's restricted from the world. She's isolated from the world. Her house is literally caped in darkness. The windows are shut most of the time. The blinds are drawn. She doesn't like outside air coming in. It's just her own kind of world that she created, and she likes to control, what's going on there. But also, it's interesting that Ethan and Jane Russell are absent from the internet, and nowadays that's kind of unheard of, but that is an intentional absence. And what this kind of shows us is that they might as well not exist, in the words of Bina, who is a side character, because Anna can't do any researching on them because she can't find pictures, she can't find Facebook profiles, whatever. And so it's almost like they're isolated from the internet world, which is still, a large part of life now. And I have a few motifs that I pointed out, which are recurring ideas. I like to think of motifs as a signature for a specific character. So this is something that I associate. Once I keep seeing it repeatedly, I start associating it with that character. In this instance, the number 4 is something that is constantly around Anna Fox. It's used in her therapy, her breathing techniques. I think it was in 2, 3, 4, out 2, 3, 4. It's also highlighted in her umbrella, which is her comfort object that she takes outside for her therapy exercises, that the umbrella has 4 lines and 4 panels or whatever. And in the third act, it's again repeated when she is trapped in a portion of her house, and she's thinking, okay, I'm surrounded by 4 doors. Which door should I take? So just by highlighting that number throughout the book, you begin to associate that with Anna. So 4 is her safety. That's her safety number. The weather was a constant kind of background thing that really paralleled with unfortunate events. And we're talking like unnatural things, heavy storms, heavy snowstorms, flood warnings. Those were usually foreshadowing pretty sad or bad events. And lastly, old films, which I have to say, We're not in the review part yet, but that was kind of annoying. And it's probably only annoying because I'm not into the old black and white classic Hollywood films, but Anna is, and that's one of the only things that she watches. I don't think she has cable, so she just watches her big bin full of classic movies. They really provided the background for a lot of Anna's stalking. And it's funny because when you think about it, she's looking out the window most of her day. She's not really talking to anyone. And a lot of times the dialogue from the movies were lining up with her observing a certain situation. So that did, that was kind of fun that the movie dialogue was essentially narrating, the events from across the street. So, the movie The Woman in the Window is currently streaming on Netflix. It was released in 2021. I want to say though, I could have swore I saw this trailer maybe a year or two ago. And I think they were supposed to have a theatrical release, but obviously with the pandemic, things are very different now. But it has an amazing cast, including Amy Adams, Anthony Mackie, Julianne Moore, Brian Tyree Henry, all faves, love them, all talented. It's about an hour and a half. And honestly, it probably could have been a solid hour. The things that were different in the film, David, who is another side character, is friendlier in the film. Bina is not in the film, which is, I think like her massage or physical therapist. Yeah. The timeline varies a little, but it's not really a major impact on the plot. And it kind of glossed over the agoraphobia conclusion. It's in the film, this isn't spoiling anything for the book, but in the film, she's kind of just cured of her agoraphobia in the end. I didn't think that was realistic, or if they were going to come to that conclusion, they had to kind of develop that a little bit more. I just felt like that was too quick of a jump. The better things in the film, I think, obviously, when you're talking about TV series and films, the musical scores add tension. And so I did like that. I thought it added a little more tension to the plot. And I liked that it melted the black and white films with the events that were happening in the present. So that was pretty cool visually. I think they could have did that a little bit more. It only happened like once or twice, but it was cool to see. I will say though, if we're talking about which one was better, they kind of were both okay. The movie was low in ratings by audience and critics alike. And it's kind of like where one does better, the other falls short. So it averaged out to be an okay thriller. I really hated reading through the narration from Anna, especially in the beginning. And she said it herself, I've been monologuing a lot lately. Yeah, girl, you have. And about a lot of stuff that doesn't even matter. I feel like a good portion of the first act could be taken out and the impact is still the same. Because we're going on, and I think the author's intention was to kind of show us how broken her mind was at this point, to kind of drive home that she's not seeing things clearly. So it adds to the tension and the confusion that the audience has. But it was like, I get it. After the first 3 chapters of her doing that, I got it. I don't need to hear anymore. That's like all she does. All she does is monologue and drink. But I mean, she's in the house all day with no one else, so that makes sense. Now, it's funny because I typed out what exactly is the mystery in all caps. And because it doesn't really get to what the mystery really is until maybe midway through the book. But it's essentially what caused the Fox family separation, and did the crime actually happen? Those are the 2 ones, but again, it took too long to get to what are we even supposed to be debating here. Now, there was a quote and there was praise from Stephen King. I think it was on the back cover or the front. I don't know. It's on one cover. I think that that's very fitting because from what I hear, the critiques of both of these authors are very similar. It wasn't a terrible book. I just, I got so fatigued reading it. Really, you know what? Take off 100 pages from the beginning and we're good. I did like the twist. There's a twist at the end. Totally didn't guess it. But it was a good book, I probably won't reread it. I certainly won't be rewatching that movie, which is sad. But the movie I watched that movie in Starbucks as I'm writing the outline, and not once did the movie have my full attention. I just kind of was glancing back and forth, and that's unlike me. I usually don't do that. But there was nothing really there. There was nothing more to invite the fans of this book in particular to view that film. So I'm kind of glad I watched it on Netflix and not in the theaters. But the two takeaways I have of this is that caring for yourself despite guilt, post-trauma, is imperative. You have to do it. Also, mind your business and maybe don't mix hard prescriptions with wine. That's all for this week. I hope everyone is having a wonderful week. Hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you all next week. Thank you.